Hello, good evening. Hello, Kairin. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well. Welcome to everyone who's joining us for tonight's discussion, and welcome to our celebration of Global Doughnut Day. So thanks very much for joining us, for all those people who have been with us from the very start. We're now on episode 86 of SCOTONOMICS, so thank you for your support and continued support until where to get us to where we are today. We've streaming on TikTok now, YouTube, Facebook, and also on Twitter. So thanks for everyone for joining us. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about the donut of Doughnut Economics. We're going to go through that in a little bit of detail, and then we're going to talk about how the overall perception of the economy frames economic frameworks like the donut. And I did a presentation to a group of students at the Glasgow Art College today, Glasgow School of Art today, and I'm going to talk about what I covered and what I learned from that. So hopefully we'll get right into the core or the heart or the missing bit of the donut. So please, any comments and questions you've got on the donut, then please drop them in and we'll see what we can do. So Kairin, when we've been speaking about the donut, it's something that you've been keen and supportive of for quite a while, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a book that I was reading when we just started SCOTONOMICS, and I really love this book. It just makes so much common sense to me. So I think it's important for our listeners that maybe you bring up the diagram of the donut and that we think about the social foundations, what they are, and also the 9 planetary boundaries and what they are, and maybe point out a few of them, but obviously our listeners and watchers can have a good look at it later. What do you think?
Okay, yep. So I'll pull up the donut, and here it is. Please let me know if you know this concept, if you're just a little bit aware of it, or if you've used it, or if you're supportive of it in the comments. That'd be really good to know. But here is the donut. I think this is taken from the World Economic Forum, and I think it's the 2017 donut.
Yeah, so this is the one that's shown that we're pushing out of our planetary boundaries, that we're overshooting, and that we're creating problems for ourselves. I think the social foundations, it goes into food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks, energy, and of course, most importantly for everyone, water. So these are the things that are a social foundation of our planet for us to live there happily and hopefully coincide with lots of biodiversity as well, and lots of flora and fauna, instead of degrading the flora and fauna that we actually really enjoy having round about us. And then moving into the planetary boundaries, these are 9. So we're talking about climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, and then fertilizer use, or perhaps the overuse of fertilizer might be a better way of putting it, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, biodiversity lost, air pollution, and ozone layer depletion. And again, these are things that we really have to not be doing anymore. And many of our listeners will know that, of course, that we have overshot on a number of these things as well, and we need to pull back from that to stay inside the safe space for humanity and for the rest of the flora and fauna that we exist with on the blue pearl, which is our home, and we need to look at it.
So I think the most recent version of the donut actually has the other planetary boundaries, and I think this year that there's been consensus that we're pushing on at least another 2 or 3 of these boundaries. Certainly, the chemical pollution, I think, is now into the red, and I think ocean acidification is now into the red. I'm not sure about air pollution, but I think there's 7 in total now of the 9 that the scientific community have said we're pushing, and we're actually into the red. So it looks bad at the moment, but I think it's actually worse 5 or 6 years later in the new version. But as we can see, the idea is to stay within the donut, isn't it? You don't want to be on the outside, you don't want to be on the inside. You just kind of want to sit in that circle.
Yeah, and Kate Raworth's having huge success, I think, presenting to governments, local governments, and the people that are working for her about this, and they get this concept really quickly. I think, she's done a fantastic job of getting people to understand it. The other list that I was going to go through before we go into what happened to you today and the people that you met today were the 7 ways to think. And you've said to me earlier on that there's now an 8th way that Kate wanted to bring in as well. So changing the goal, GDP to the donut. Well, a lot of our listeners will know that, we're not big fans of GDP. We think it's a measure that's overly used by our political class. The second way to think is moving from a self-centered thinking about the market to an embedded economy. The third one is, moving from that concept of rational economic man to social adaptable humans, which is how we actually are, as opposed to this economic model that is taught in Economics 101, which we, both find bizarre. And I think for you, when you went into doing economics at Dundee University, it just didn't make any sense. And it was clear for Kate that it didn't make sense to her either. And then get savvy with systems. And this is something that really I get annoyed with a lot of economics, because it doesn't think in systems thinking in any way, and doesn't, I think someone also mentioned that when they did Economics 101, it was seen that water and the land were just free goods that we could just use and not really and throw away, and that's really a problem. Design to distribute, I think that's also obviously something we really need to think about as well. Create to regenerate, and be agnostic about growth as well. That's quite an interesting one as well, because there are other ways to grow, and I think what she's really thinking about, and I've got some great examples of this, the sharing economy, which is expanding, and we can see the tools of this and ways that people are doing this are expanding. But you had one today.
So that was the title of the book, wasn't it? Doughnut Economics: How to Think Like or 7 ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, wasn't it? Was the actual It's one of those books. I knew that, but I never really thought past the Doughnut Economics. Well, on the presentation today that Kate did to the kind of global community who were online watching her, she said that there's probably an 8th way, and that is to be active as a 21st century economist. So that she said that when she wrote the 7, she knew that it would be an 8th and a 9th and a 10th. She had no problem to go past that, but she said that there was an 8th. Yeah. So a couple of things. Kate's presentation is brilliant, and if you go online, you'll be able to see it, because it was a very similar presentation she's done before, and she had loads of different props. And she was using a pipe to show where GDP is and where resource use goes. And this is something that we've shared before. And this is GDP growth over the last 2,000 years. And you can see this hockey stick that basically starts about 1950. And then when you go up to about 1970, really, it kicks on again. So this is GDP growth. And here is global energy consumption. And you'll see that it's probably as close to one to one as you can imagine. And what Kate was saying in her presentation was, we really need to think about this relationship between energy, material use, and growth. And she was saying, with the pipe, we don't just need it to come down a little bit. We actually need to get for it to go flat, and then we need for it to reduce. And when you look at the gap between where we are now and where we need to go to stay within planetary boundaries, I mean, it's absolutely huge. But I think this concept is really interesting, because it's something that, as you said, people intuitively understand. It's a really simple way to sum up our economic problems, and that's really all that she's trying to do. At no point is she saying that this is the economy, and it's not really an economic model. It's a kind of global. It's a global model, and how we. Not just how our economy is involved, but how our society is involved. And it is simple, and I think it works really, really well. Another thing that I wanted to pop up, because you said Kate was kind of growth agnostic, and I think she still is, although again today I was getting little hints of, she said she was very supportive of degrowth, and the academics had done a huge amount of work. And when we were putting our economic frameworks together, we put the Doughnut Economics in this kind of steady state paradigm. And I think if Kate had to choose, she would definitely agree and say that it's in this right hand model. So you can see on the growth paradigm, it's got green or sustainable, circular economy, economic development, and then the other one we've put degrowth alongside Doughnut Economics, community wealth building, just transition and well-being economy. So I think she would kind of agree with that it's in that. And we also thought that, you know, the Scottish government kind of considers a just transition, well-being economy, community wealth building within this economy, the economic framework that we've got at the moment. And we're kind of suggesting that probably the economy has to change to really be able to affect these frameworks. So it was quite nice seeing Kate mention degrowth today, because I know she's, as you said, she's growth agnostic.
I think also as well, you know, what you really realise as well, that so many people don't really understand the economic system, and they're really hooked into this idea that it's necessary for us to grow in order to have social goods, like, you know, a national health service, schools, these kind of things. That's been so baked in to economic thinking for so long, and it's so stuck in so many people's minds. And you found that you were doing this talk today that, you know, that still is very much baked in for it was a lot of younger people you were speaking to today, wasn't it?
Yeah. So my presentation today, there was about 60 people, there was about 20 people online and about 40 members of the faculty and the student body at the Glasgow School of Art. And what I decided to do was to try and say to them, if you're really supportive of the donut, what type of economy do you think would support a donut? And it was a really interesting kind of conversation. And what I said to them was, you know, I did a little quiz, okay, and I said to them, here's 5 questions. Tell me true or false, okay. And I did all the old favourites that our regular viewers will know. But I said to them, you know, is it true or false? Do taxes pay for government spending? Question 2, if the government doesn't collect enough taxes, it needs to borrow to make sure that we can have enough things to pay for. True or false? And if you're watching, you can play this little game as well. Question 3, the government can go bust. True or false? When GDP goes up, well-being goes up too. True or false? Banks can only lend the money that they have as savings to you. True or false? Now, I knew, or I was very confident, that they would all say all those things were true. And unfortunately, but fortunately for my presentation, they all said those things were true. Apart from what I thought was quite interesting was they weren't sure that GDP matched well-being. So even in that audience, there was still that all looks true, taxes pay, bonds pay, but I'm not sure if GDP actually is a good thing for well-being. Well, true still won, but it was a bit closer. I would say at least 3/4 of the room thought it was true when I asked these questions. And then I just said to them, okay, how supportive is an economy? How supportive is an economy of a global, of the donut with these kind of constraints? How successful do you think you can implement the donut with these constraints, that governments can go bust, that taxes pay? And then they had a conversation, and then they came back, and basically they were all saying, it's actually really challenging if this is the case. So I said to them, okay, now what I'm going to do to you now is I'm going to give you another version of the economy. Okay, so a second kind of economy. How easy would it be to achieve the donut if these 5 things were actually how the economy worked? So what if taxes were not needed to pay for things, but governments could just create currency to purchase any of these things that they needed? What if governments actually didn't need to borrow money to make up any shortfall between the taxes and the money they collected? And what if the government could never go bust? And what if we stopped chasing GDP because it increased inequality and ecological damage, and we use new metrics? What if banks were able to loan to everyone who had a good idea and who they thought would pay back? Right? So they all went away for 5 minutes, and they all came back and they said, you know, so one of the students actually said to me, is this a trick question?
Right.
Yeah, is this a trick question? And I said, no, imagine the economy worked like this. How much easier would it be? And it was fascinating because they all came back and they said, well, it would be so much easier because we wouldn't be worried about what the government spent. There would always be enough private money because if people had ideas and they wanted to do stuff. And, there was a little bit more of an upbeat atmosphere. So I kind of said to him, okay, which one of these is the economic reality? And they all said it was the first one. And hardly anyone said it was the second one. And I said to him, actually, the way the economy works is the second description. So this is really good news because it makes the donut more achievable, and it's also the truth. So these two options I've given you, that's the truth. And, there was kind of blank faces and quizzical looks and are you pulling my leg? And it's just trying to get across to people that first, the economic levers are actually there at the state level if we understand how the economy works. And that's what I tried to get across in the kind of short period of time that I had with them, that we can achieve something like the donut if we understand much better how the economy works. And I think I would be as bold to say, I think from the economic framework, it's missing this idea of the role of money and how government and the financial sector actually works. And I think that understanding kind of empowers a lot of progressive people who want to do something because they looked at the economy and saw the challenges and thought they were too much. But when they had a better understanding or a clearer understanding of what actually happens, they saw that the donut was much more achievable. So that was kind of the first thing that I wanted to do. And I thought it was really interesting that without me pushing them too much, they saw the real opportunity in that second description of the economy.
Yeah, that's fantastic that they started to see that, and hopefully a percentage of them will go away and do the research. I mean, the reason I wanted to do this with you is to educate people and get them to understand what they can ask their politicians for. And we know that in Scotland we are restricted as a non-currency issuing government. But, a UK level, then people understand that, for example, when Rachel Reeves says the money's run out, this is nonsense. And they should not accept this because it's not a reason to not have a national health service. It's not a reason to, for example, not replace schools that have aerated concrete in their ceilings. The money is not the issue; it's the real resources. And let's get people to really seriously understand that, so that at a political level they demand what they should have, and frankly, what they have in other countries. And we don't have here, and what we should have here. Yeah.
But we can see the challenge that so many of those people, I mean, they weren't economists, they were all creative individuals, but they thought that the economy worked in a way that we've been fed for the last 40 years. And, I ended my presentation and I said, I'm not expecting that you all go, oh, William must be right and everyone else is wrong. But what if I am right? What potential does that lead? And here's the opportunity to kind of go and look at these things and see them differently. And I think that's really important to kind of say to people, this is difficult and it's a challenge to look at the economy this way when you all think something different. I've got a question from Charles, which I'm going to just pull up here. So is population growth and the resultant increased material use not a factor? I think I know what you mean, Charles. And there is a few different ways to look at this. If we are looking specifically at the donut, you'll see that there's no limitation on anything around population, and population is not what's measured; it's the impact of population. And I think that's kind of where their framework sits. And what you could take from that is that it doesn't really matter how many people we've got on the planet, it's what material use they have. So there could be twice as many people, obviously, if everyone uses half the amount of material. So certainly within my approach and my understanding is that population is something that doesn't have to be managed. That will be managed naturally, like the population of really any species is managed. We're at a level where it's not particularly damaging to the planet at the moment, as long as we don't consume too much. And population's likely to level out over the next 50 years. So I don't think it's a particularly a particularly big concern. And I've also got huge ethical issues with people trying to control population, because it tends to be only a certain type of person who they end up trying to control in terms of the population, and obviously most of that impacts women. So I've got huge ethical problems with that, but I know where the question comes from for a lot of people.
Yeah, my understanding also as well is that the world population is about to peak, and it will actually start to go down fairly soon as well. And you're absolutely right, William. It's really all about the materials that we use to live, and really thinking on a personal level, but also a governmental level, what we're going to do to help the planet and help each other in that respect of material use.
And I think that feeds beautifully into the question that George has just, that Gregor has just put up there. Would individuals need to consume less, use less energy, shop less? I've covered this before, Gregor, and I would imagine certainly my approach would be that governments have to start doing things and businesses start having to do things. And I think the impact on individuals would be much further down the line. And I certainly my approach to any economy which had to be much more appreciative of what its resources it was using would be to say, what is the government going to do now? What are businesses going to do now? And what you'll find is that people scaremonger by saying, but yeah, you need to eat less, you need to drive less, you need to consume less. I think after a period of time, these will be decisions that we make to support what governments and what governments are telling businesses to do. But at its core, individual consumption will change, but to stay within that donut, it's really clear that overall globally levels of consumption and the way that we consume have to change.
Yeah, I mean, what we have created, and Kate points this out, is financial meltdown, climate breakdown, protests crackdown. Now, this is something that's concerned me for a number of years as well, is that when these things are affecting our society in the ways that they are currently, is that governments will seek to control the populations more. Now, we are seeing this in the UK right now, and we're seeing it in other places as well. And this has also been a political concern of mine, is that, if we allow this rampant consumerism to go on, it can only go somewhere politically very negative.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that book tries to be much broader than just that kind of economic focus to cover the social aspects as well. And yeah, so Gregor, I think that question is a really, really interesting one. And I think it's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen next year. But eventually we're going to have politicians who are talking about how the economy has to drastically change. And we really need to start talking about what the government does, how they incentivize, how they spend. I mean, the government spends in the UK almost every pound spent in the UK, 50% of it is spent by the government. So the government has an absolutely huge impact on the economy, and the government could effectively completely change how it spends its money, and individuals would hardly have to change their expenditure because of the impact that government spending has. So it's absolutely huge, and that's why Kairin and I focus so much on it. And one thing I did want to say, which was really interesting, was when I gave them the two types of economy, the first one being the neoliberal version of the economy that I started with, no one came back and said, oh, but how do you control inflation under that economic framework? How do you make sure that inequality doesn't rise within that? No one questioned that economic framework. But when I presented the second framework, people came back and said, oh yeah, we chatted about that, but we just thought that it would cause there'd be loads of unemployment, or inflation would be through the roof, or we weren't sure who would be really wealthy in this, or what would happen to the poor. And for me, it was really, really educational from my perspective to see that people didn't question the paradigm that they knew. They questioned the paradigm that was presented to them that was different. And they didn't accept that. They didn't say, okay, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to accept that this is all true. What impact does it have? That was a really difficult step to get them over, because the first thing they wanted to do was to question that paradigm. And I thought that was fascinating. And in delivering another presentation like this, I'm going to change it so that I can answer some of those questions first, rather than just assume that people will take it. But I'm sure people who understand how the brain works wouldn't be surprised by that. But I thought it was fascinating that they only questioned the framework that they didn't understand, and just accepted as true everything that they thought was the case at the moment. So I thought that was fascinating.
I really wanted to bring to our listeners as well a really interesting thing from the book that I loved, and that was, the logic of 350 years before Christ, and that was from Aristotle, who distinguished economics, which he saw as the noble art of managing the household, from crematistics, which is the pernicious art of accumulating wealth. Money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase interest, he wrote in 350 BC. All modes of wealth, this is the most unnatural. This is 350 BC.
Yeah.
So people could see this even then, that the destructive force that this had in a planet which was not so populated. And wasn't in the situation we are today, with the massive amount of energy that fossil fuels, having brought them up from the ground with all that stored energy, have created. But even 2,500 years ago, they were looking at this and saying, this can't be. We can't have a society like this. It's pernicious and poisonous.
That's fascinating. And so that would have been focusing much more on kind of waste, but more kind of like inequality, because these were problems that were happening way before, on this graph here, and 2,000 years before there was actually a huge ecological impact of consumption. So really interesting overall, the presentation to that audience, and you could see how keen they were to understand the donut and to kind of put it into practice, and I think that framing really helped, and that's just what we're trying to do. It's just what we're trying to do with the show, and is to try and demystify the type of economy we've got at the moment in Scotland, so that people can decide with a much kind of clearer frame of mind what's achievable. So I think it was interesting to try and put that donut within that framework, and that's kind of what we've been doing in our articles for the National as well. We've covered degrowth, and we're going to cover community wealth building next week. We cover the donut tomorrow, and we've looked at the just transition and the wellbeing economy, and it's just say, look, if you want these things to happen, what type of economy do you need? What type of economy is most supportive? So really fascinating. We've got another comment I think I'll bring up from Charles here.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, they did, Charles. Yes. And actually Steve Keen talks about that quite often as well, that debt forgiveness. But, it's also understanding that our currency is a form of debt to each other. We are indebted to each other. We are all literally using the currency as a tool of indebtedness to each other. And the nurse looks after you when you're sick, and you perhaps educate her children. These are all things that have to flow and happen through the economy in order to make the economy as a maybe country household work. Is that we use this tool. And the other thing that was in the book as well, she's talking about the different ways that the sharing economy is working, and you're seeing this with music and with education. So for example, when I was at university, I was using something called the Khan Academy to help me with my maths and things like that. And these are things that were free. I have friends that are very much a proponent of using free software, and people are willing to put that work out there for free for other people to use. Those people exist, and they are busy doing these things to help each other for nothing.
Yeah, and there's quite a few examples in the book, isn't it? And isn't there? And what I would say, and again, what I was trying to put across in the presentation today, is that if you understand the economy we have, you're in a much better position to be able to change it. However, you need to realize that the economic paradigm that we've got is still market-led, capitalist economy, focused on growth, focused on consumption. And there's only so far you can stretch that. And I would say if we wanted a donut economy, then that's impossible that would be achieved in this kind of growth capitalist framework that we have. So I certainly think that we can have we can have a much more successful donut economy. And Glasgow and Barcelona are the two cities that are pushing the donut framework forward the most. We could have these types of cities, but only to the point where the economy allows it to expand. We need to change the economy. We need to change the paradigm if we want these things to work. And my final point, building on something that Charles has said, yep, I agree completely. It's really interesting that no one talks about debt relief. This is something, or debt forgiveness, sorry. This is something that has happened right through the ages. And what I wanted to say was we also don't realize that this period in history from basically the 1950s to now is absolutely unique. There's no other period in history where we have pulled down and used the kind of gift of millennia in terms of fossil fuels to generate our wealth. And we still look at this period and we look back 50 years and think the next 50 years can be the same. And I think it's absolutely crucial we realize that this little period in time is unique, and we need to look much broader to how these problems were solved, because perpetual growth, and Kate gave this stat in her presentation today, if we grow by the desired 2.5–3% per year, we have a bigger economy. It's twice the size of the economy than it is now. And if anyone seriously says to you, Kairin, or anyone who's watching, that we can have a global economy twice the size that we have now and still be able to live in a habitable future in 30–40 years after that, it is literally the definition of madness. And that's where we're going, and that's why we need to use every framework possible, like the donut, community wealth building, a just transition, and well-being economy, to try and properly frame the challenges that are ahead.
Yeah, and we hope that this program helps people to make those arguments to your political representatives, that you know what you need to ask for the sake of your health, your family's, your friends' health, your community's health, and the health of the planet as well.
Yeah, and what a good way to end. Charles, you're right. I think if you were looking at a country that had the biggest potential and the possibility to run a very different type of economy, I think it would be Scotland. It's the right size, it's got the right resources, it's incredibly well educated, it's a wealthy country, it's a progressive country. Unfortunately, at the moment, and to an extent understandable, we need to have a government in Scotland that understands the potential and the need to have our own currency and to kind of walk the different path than Westminster, because the chances, as we've all seen over the last week, the chances of having a Westminster government and I think maybe even my lifetime that is progressive and understands the challenges ahead is absolutely minimal. So thank you so much, Charles. I hope you all agree with that. Please give me a thumbs up, or what are you talking about, William, in the comments if that's the case. We're actually going to look at degrowth next week with a bit of an MMT focus. So I suppose in a way it builds on from a little bit of what we're covering. If you support degrowth, then how is an understanding of MMT supportive of that? Same time next week, and then the following Monday we have a live Q&A where we're going to be covering lots of topics. So thanks very much for joining us tonight. Gregor, thanks so much for that, and we'll see you all hopefully next week. Please do like, comment and share, and hope you enjoy the rest of Global Doughnut Day. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.